people, but it is what it is. Hopefully, the speakers today will help educate you in the issues surrounding euthanasia. Is that any better? It is better, okay. Sorry, I was just saying that. Okay, this is a spiritual battle. I think those here already know that. The media tries to ignore that. So we'll start with prayer. I'm very pleased to see representatives of the Orthodox Church here, especially Bishop Suan. But the Western Church celebrated Pentecost last Sunday. The Holy Spirit arriving at the beginning of the church. So we're going to ask Jesus to send his Holy Spirit to change the hearts and minds of the House of Assembly, to see that it's never right to assist someone to commit suicide. And you might like to say this prayer with me that you've probably all heard. Come, Holy Spirit, come fill the hearts of your faithful and kindle in them the fire of your love. Send forth your Spirit, and they shall be created, and you shall renew the face of the earth. Amen. And I'd like everyone to say the Lord's Prayer, which Jesus himself gave us, and the prayer that unites all Christians. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. And I acknowledge also the presence of other clergymen of different denominations, so thank you for your attendance. I'll just give you a brief rundown of our speakers. All of whom have made special time available. They're all busy. Dr. Tony Turnbull is going to be our first speaker. She's a GP. I'll introduce her a little bit more in a few minutes. Mr. Frank Pangallo, member of the Legislative Council, is at a meeting, but he's going to pop out of the meeting to come and address it. And Mr. Stephen Knoll, MP, is standing there at the back alongside Bishop Suan of the Greek Orthodox Church. And Mrs. Poppy Vivian, President of Right to Life South Australia, will be our final speaker. Now, our first speaker, Dr. Tony Turnbull, long-time general practitioner and advocate for life. She's been involved for a long time in the anti-abortion movement and now in anti-euthanasia. She has 6 children, one of whom is also a doctor. Tony will talk about some of her own experiences in ministry to the dying, including her own mother. So please give a warm welcome to Dr. Tony Turnbull.
If you can't hear me at this stage. I'm a GP. I have had 25 years experience working in an aged care facility or nursing home where I care for the majority of the residents. So my talk really is about my experience looking after the dying. I consulted at the nursing home weekly, but called in also as necessary day or night as they required. Though this was taxing at times, it also helped me to train the staff, have stock of medications that we could use in emergencies, and also have continuity of care. So those things are very important and are often missing now. A nursing home is really a hospice, but the patients are then admitted to nursing homes for care, but generally for some time before they die. My work in the nursing home is very satisfying because we work as a team. With the nursing staff, the family, the patient and myself. We talk together, we consulted all the time. For most patients, pain is not a problem at the time of dying. I'll repeat that. It's very important that you hear this. For most patients, pain is is not a problem at the time of dying. The use of the pain patch given through the skin reduces nearly all pain far earlier. I put pain patches on everyone so they didn't have to have oral pain relief through the dying time. What we were dealing with then was anxiety only. Anxiety of the patient, but also the family. At this nursing home, our team was very aware of this, and we made it our task to reduce this anxiety, to be as creative as possible. An example of this was once we had a couple living in this nursing home. The wife was dying, and the husband was distressed that his family were busy visiting the dying wife and he felt neglected. So we moved his bed into a sitting room, which was cleared so the beds could be together. We placed them side by side, head to tail, so each spouse could see each other, and the family then gathered around the bed, and rented a food. Some members stayed overnight. The dying process for this woman and family was more a celebration with her life. It was a loving and joyous experience for herself and the family. Only very occasionally I've had to call a palliative care team in for advice. And I must say, their care is excellent. They always answered straight away, and they were always able to help. In 40 years of practice, it has always been possible to reduce the patient's pain at a practical level. When I hear politicians talk of traumatic, painful death of family or friends and then the terminal phase of life, all I can say is they need another doctor. To legalise euthanasia in this state would be a very grave mistake. Euthanasia stops the caring and the very special time surrounding the dying process. Euthanasia makes the sick person believe that they're a nuisance, and I expect to do the unselfish thing of asking for euthanasia. And euthanasia enables the family to greedily manipulate the elderly to ask for a quick end so they can carve up the fortune. Euthanasia stops the important spiritual work, which I have seen many times, of a patient seeing and communicating with unseen people in perfect peace for days, maybe doing spiritual work which could affect their eternity. How can anyone know when a person needs to die? To suppose that we know is to play God, and decreasing the person's spiritual work needing to occur around the time when they are dying. I've also experienced family members asking me to hurry up their mother's dying process as they have an important event that they need to attend. Having established that their mother is in no distress or discomfort, and the discomfort is entirely their own, I suggested that this is their mother's gig, not mine or theirs, and they need to go home and work out their own problem. I've also had patients who asked me to kill them. One woman who was in hospital, breast cancer with terrible said to me one day when I saw her, I want you to end it all now. She meant it. She'd given away all her possessions, said goodbye to everyone, and that was her last day. She decided this. I replied that my job is to help her to live until she dies. And it showed her that she had really died in her own mind by closing the windows in her room, not eating and refusing to communicate with her family and friends. I suggested she make a bucket list which she could help to complete with her husband and her young son. She considered this over a few days. We moved the patient into the larger room, adding a desk to the room, and her husband worked from there. And every day an item on the list would be chosen, and the three would go out taking patients' medication with them in an envelope to administer through the day. After a few weeks, this became only morning thing in a few hours. Then she went to sleep, waking only for a few hours every day, Then after a long sleep one day, she woke, looked around the room, saw her husband, smiled at him and said, "Thank you, it's all right now," and she died in vain. It wasn't really a beautiful death. The family was all around. She wanted to want to see the children. Forget about the beautiful death. Sick people hoping to choose the time of their death think that they're controlling, they're transferring control into their own hands. But in reality, they're transforming even more control into the hands of doctors. Doctors already have a lot of control, and they do not need any more control. In 1995, they put together a consent to medical treatment of healthcare act, which gave the medical practitioners civil but they given them I'll very briefly ignore me still. Yes. It makes the medical practitioner responsible for the treatment and care of the terminal phase of the terminal illness, incurs no civil or criminal liability by administering medical treatment with the intention of relieving pain or distress, even though an incidental effect of that treatment is to hasten the death of the patient. So doctors are protected, so they can give as much pain relief as they feel they need to in the circumstance. However, the Act also states this Act does not authorise the administration of medical treatment for the purpose of causing death of the person to whom the treatment is administered, nor authorise a person to suicide. So the intention is particularly important here, and is a very fine line, as you all know. Talk about my mother's death because this illustrates a few of these points. My mother was living in a house joined to ours for the previous 10 years. She had reached the age of 98 and my husband wanted stem cells in his arthritic knee and he could only get it in Bangkok. So we placed my mother in a good nursing home and respite so we could go overseas and he could have his treatment. Say, I got a text from my brother. It said, "Mum is deteriorating. She's diagnosed with cardiac failure in hospital yesterday, is not able to ingest medication, will be given pain relief and fluid reduction," you know what that means. The doctor says Mum will last only a couple of days. Well, having worked in a nursing home, the only way you know a person's going to last 2 days is you're actually going to be slowly stopping them from drinking and then they therefore die. So this text immediately alarmed me. So I heard from my daughter the day before that my mother had been out with her. She's in a wheelchair but she's not moribund. She wasn't in intense agony. She was able to transfer into a car. She was able to take her out for the day. She was tired. She wasn't eating a lot. But she was nowhere near dead, it seemed. So I then spoke to the doctor's mother, my mother's doctor, who said my mum was in a lot of pain. I said, "Has she fallen over and broken a bone?" "No, she's just in a lot of pain." I said, "What are you doing?" The doctor said, I think she needs midazolam, which is a sedative, and fentanyl, which is a strong analgesic. They give it subcutaneously as a mixture. "Has she fractured a bone?" "No, she's just in a lot of pain." I said, "I've lived with my mother. Her pain is in her arthritic knees. If she lies flat, it's much less painful. She has a pain patch on her chest. Please take out the line, the subcutaneous line." Well, she said, "This is good palliative care." I said, I'll be on the plane. I'll be there in 24 hours. I sent my daughter in to advocate for her. Please take it out. She didn't want to, but she did. Because this is how she manages every dying person. So I got there. And my mother was frail. She was not really eating, but she was drinking a little. She recognised me. She was speaking. She was actually in no discomfort. She just needed reassurance. Unfortunately, it was a large room and I was able to stay overnight. She needed no further pain relief. I called my eldest brother over from Melbourne. When he arrived, because he was the very favourite, she said, am I dying? And we said, well, it's up to you, Mum, we don't know. She said, in that case, let's have a dying party. My mother loved the party. The following 5 days, my mother, she looked, after the few days, she didn't need a lot of reassurance, but she looked up at the ceiling and her face shone. And it was, and then she stepped back in the pillow. And my brother thought, well, that's the end. I'm off home. And we went back to Melbourne. But she had another 5 days to go. Well, she was waiting. She loved her limited army. There was just one and facility. She loved her. She fed her that. And also she was speaking to people who couldn't see. At 5 to 5 whole day. She was in no distress. Easy death. My mother was not in pain. But if she'd been given the cocktail of drugs ordered, she would have missed out on the love poured into her by family and also the 5 days spent in the some zone that we don't really understand. There was some sort of spiritual work that we're unable to see. Importantly, my mother did not believe in God, but she had been always terrified of illness, death, dying. And in our household when we grew up, these were forbidden subjects. But she died with a loving family around her with her support. Ironically, she was a lawyer in her working days, and she had said to me, I don't believe in God, but she would never support legalised euthanasia because of the increased opportunity of elder abuse, leaving the chief witness dead. The Consent to Medical Treatment Palliative Care Act is giving doctors the protection that they need to be lifted with pain relief when it is necessary, not with every patient they see in terminal phase, but only using as necessary. The problem of caring for dying persons is far bigger than simply eradicating pain. There is a lack of understanding of what is necessary at the time of a dying person. There is a lack of understanding that dying is a part of normal life, and that the family of the dying person needs to be part of the dying person's last days. I've noticed some cultures handle this, the last days of a person's life, much better than other cultures. My mother's doctor, giving what she called good palliative care, was taking over, shortening my mother's life because she could, not because Mum needed it. The doctor's intention was to get this messy time over quickly. This happens a lot. So this is a typical example of what happens all too frequently and is really an abuse of the intended provision of the Consent to Medical Treatment Act. So, why would we think giving doctors more power to take the life of a patient is not going to be abused too? Would any amendment to tighten this euthanasia bill ever be followed by many doctors? You know what happened to our abortion law, which was meant for the few hard cases. To give any section of society the right to take the life of another can only end in tragedy, as doctors are no better or worse than the rest of society. Doctors are human. Giving doctors responsibility to terminate a patient's life is far too big a responsibility for any person to have, and it is wide open for abuse. The euthanasia bill before Parliament is having many amendments added to it as safeguards, but we all know, however, the best safeguard is not to legalise euthanasia. I understand that many people fear the unknown and are working, and certainly they're worried about the safety of their own futures, but the cost of acting on this fear by legalising euthanasia is far too great. So I call on all MPs, please do not vote for this euthanasia bill. Vote it down. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. Dr. Turnbull has to be in surgery at Martin at 10:30, so she's got to race off. But it is very good of her to make the time available, isn't it? And as a message for any MPs who would like to talk to her privately, either those here or those inside who are not here, she can make herself available on certain occasions, and we'd be very happy to do so over the next couple of weeks. Okay, well, I mentioned to you that we have two MPs agreed to talk to us. I think we need to realise that it's very difficult for a Member of Parliament to address a gathering such as this on this topic. They're under a lot of pressure from their peers and from their party in the case of one of the larger parties, and it takes a lot of courage. The next speaker was in fact Mr. Stephen Knoll, who was formerly a minister in the government. He's unfortunate for us, he's chosen not to recontest the next election. There's probably a message there. But anyway, can you please welcome Stephen Knoll? Thank you.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you for having me. This is the first time I've ever addressed a rally, and I think the only time I will ever address a rally. But and to stand up here and speak is not a decision that I make lightly, but also one that will weigh heavily on me over the course of today. And what we are going to discuss today and tonight is a very heavy and difficult, perhaps the most difficult topic that we as members of Parliament have to deal with and grapple with the fundamental nature of what it means to be human. And I think in this debate we all want the same goal, and that is we want to end the suffering for people. To be human is to want to not see people suffer. And if we think about the growth and human evolution over eons, what we have chosen to do as a human race is to try and improve the quality and quantity of life that we have for ourselves and we have for our fellow citizens. That innate desire drives so much innovation, so much improvement, not only in medical science, but across a whole series of spheres. And so much of what we discuss inside on a weekly basis is about trying to improve the quality and quantity of people's lives. But the way that this debate has been framed, in my view, isn't the right way to look at this issue. And we were lucky enough a few weeks ago to hear from a former CEO of the Cancer Council and a faculty member at the School of Medical Sciences at Adelaide University, Professor Ian Olver, who said, the opposite to suffering is to end somebody's suffering. The opposite to suffering does not need to be death. And the way that this debate is being framed is as if those are the only two choices that are available. And that is not right. That is not right. And in fact, there's been much discussion over weeks and months about the state of our health system here in South Australia and to what extent we can do more to improve it. I think we can all understand that one area that needs to be improved is access to palliative care. And as somebody that comes from a regional area, we know that good quality palliative care is not available for all South Australians. And I think that the debate we're going to have today needs to recognise the fact that without access to good quality palliative care for all South Australians, taking the step of passing this bill is going to provide an alternative for people where that palliative care is not available. Now I want to provide a couple of points for this morning. One from a man who I disagree with and have disagreed with certainly over my life. I've never met him. But on this issue, I think that he has said more eloquently than any other what I think my feelings on this topic are. It's former Prime Minister Paul Keating, who has been an outspoken critic on this topic for a number of years. And just want to give a couple of sentences that I think are most pertinent. He writes that no matter what justifications are offered for the bill, it constitutes an unacceptable departure in our approach to human existence and the irrevocable sanctity that should govern our understanding of what it means to be human. And he goes on to say that what matters is that under law there will be people whose lives we honour and those we believe are better off dead. And I think that fundamental moving away from the phrase that all life matters and all life has meaning is a step as a society that we should not take. Because if we accept the fact that there are people whose life no longer has meaning at the end of their life, then what is to say that we do not accept that some lives don't have meaning at other stages of people's lives? And I think that once we cross that Rubicon and accept that fundamental fact, which is what we would do if we passed this bill, then I think that fundamental change in the nexus of what it means to be human and what it means to strive to be human and to help improve the lives of your fellow man and woman, that is a dangerous step, and one that I think that this society is going to regret coming time. And I just want to leave with a final passage. And there's a woman that I met back when this was last debated, a palliative care nurse in a regional area who retired after 30 years worth of service in a pretty difficult area where she was the only nurse available for people and would often have 20 and 30 patients at a time that she was dealing with. And what she said at that point has stuck with me ever since, and that is that she can, in almost every circumstance, deal with people's physical pain. But what she was unable to do was to deal with their existential pain, their existential questions, their spiritual pain. And that is a different question, and one that each of us needs to grapple with in our own way. But that difference between being able to deal with physical pain as distinct from existential pain is again something that we need to realise. And physical pain is what we should be thinking of in terms of alleviating suffering. But those broader questions are ones that we as parliamentarians should not be legislating about, and ones that should be grappled with by each individual in their own way. So can I thank you all for coming out today? Can I thank you for your support? This will be a very heavy evening of discussion where we do tackle the fundamentals of life and what it means to be human. And to see you all out here this morning certainly does give courage for those of us who are going to try and fight for the sake of their life. Thank you.
Thank you very much, I appreciate you making the effort. This talk reminds me about, we all heard of Peter Singer. Peter Singer is a legendary person from the left who espouses a utilitarian philosophy. And as it applies to people, he says, at both ends of the spectrum, if the person is of no use to society, they should be killed. So, for example, if there's a newborn baby that's got all these handicaps and it's never ever going to be any use to society, we should kill it. At the other end of the spectrum, a person who's reached the age where they are no longer able to contribute to society and may be dying, they should be killed as well. Well, he lives overseas, and his mother lived in Melbourne. He came from Melbourne originally, and she got dementia and she was ailing. So he flew back to see her for the last time, and of course she met his criteria for someone who is of no further use to society. And so, according to his utilitarian philosophy, she should have been put to death. But he couldn't do it. He said, perhaps it's more difficult than I first thought. When it's your own mother, you can't do it. Well, everybody is loved by someone, whether they're mother, father, brother, sister, auntie or uncle, daughter or son, whatever. Everyone has a right to life. And even Peter Singer eventually found that himself. I'd now like to introduce to you Mr. Frank Pangallo from the Legislative Council. Many of you will remember Frank in his earlier days as a legislative reporter, where he was always seeking after the truth, and he had to deal with a lot of people who are dishonest. There was a legendary statement made by a former politician who set up his own political party that he was going to keep the so-and-sos honest. Well, I think that's what Frank is doing. Frank himself has not come to his views on euthanasia easily or lightly. He told me he's put a huge amount of research into it, which he does with other projects. I'm very pleased that he's been prepared to come and speak to us. So would you please welcome Frank Pangallo.
Thank you, Alan. I'd just like to acknowledge that we meet on the land of the Ghana, and we respect the elders past and present. Thank you for coming here today, and I'd like to thank all the previous speakers, including my colleague, the Honourable Stephen Canol, previously the Honourable Stephen Canol, is no longer the Minister, but I thank Stephen for his comments today and the other speakers that we've heard from. Look, as Alan has pointed out, when I came into this job, I was rather ambivalent about BAD, and initially my intention was to support this bill, but I thought I'd better have a look closely into this because it's the hardest decision I've ever had to make in my mind. Simply because I'm having to deal with the lives of people, lives of South Australians I don't even know, and my vote would be crucial in the determination of that. So I decided to do as much research as I possibly could, and I did it for weeks. I read books, I read papers, I read reports from the House of Lords Committee that looked into it. I looked at what was happening overseas in jurisdictions that have approved voluntary assisted suicide, because that's what it is. It's state-sanctioned suicide. They can use all the fuzzy, warm words that you possibly can, but that's what it is. Because you're asking people to make a decision on taking their own lives, and they need to address that. But I've had a look at what was going on in other jurisdictions, reports that had been pulled together. Quite frankly, some of those countries are now questioning whether they did the right thing, particularly Belgium and the Netherlands. And we're finding that there are architects of euthanasia in those countries who are now regretting the decisions they made. Simply because once you open the door, there's no turning back. You can't close the door. And what happens as time goes on, people become desensitised to this type of legislation. And then they start to amend it. And there'll be future politicians, when I'm long gone from Parliament, and my other colleagues here, that will look at amending the legislation and opening it up to other areas. And we're seeing that already, where they've opened up euthanasia to psychiatric illnesses. And there have been some shocking cases that are now subject to criminal investigations overseas of young children who were given a permit, or their parents were given a permit for euthanasia, aged 9 and 11. There was a young man who suffered from Asperger's syndrome, and he was given a permit for euthanasia because he felt he could no longer cope with the world, being alone, having no friends or whatever. And so they allowed a permit for that to happen. That shows you where it goes, when you suddenly become desensitised to human life. So those are some of the stories that I read. And look, I've read both sides of it. Not just one side, but I read both sides of it. And then I came to the conclusion that this isn't where society needs to be going. This isn't our society that respects the sanctity of human life to the end. And I hope that my colleagues in the House of Assembly would have done as much research on this topic as I have, because it changed my mind. And I thought, this is not the way we need to be going. What we should be doing is spending a lot more money on really good palliative care. There's a lot of medical opinion that says that is the way that we should go. look, there's all these, warm, fuzzy words about dignity in dying. Quite frankly, there's no dignity in dying in any way. It's painful. It doesn't matter who it is or whatever. Death is painful to that individual in some sort of way and to the families. I didn't personalise my argument in the Legislative Council. I could have. I had my mother pass away a few months ago, but I didn't. I just looked at the hard, cold facts and research that was out there. And that led me to oppose it, and that was where my vote went. So we lost the vote, 14-7 in the Legislative Council, now in the House of Assembly, and it looks like it probably will go through. The makeup of the House of Assembly has changed. What concerns me though is, I tried to put up an amendment to the Legislative Council and I got rolled on. That was the conscientious objection to individuals and institutions whose belief it is that DAs should not be allowed in their hospitals or ATM facilities. They have religious beliefs. And I felt it's important in this debate where people say, well look, it's all about choice. It's all about choice of people if they wish to take the path of euthanasia. Well, what about the choice of institutions in saying, well look, we don't want to practice euthanasia, go somewhere else and do that. If you wish to do that, respect our beliefs. Well, unfortunately there are some in this place that don't respect those beliefs. And I'll put our health minister among them. Because last Friday, he distributed a report that was on wellbeing government letterhead. It was an unattributed report in which he tried to make something to inform members about conscientious objection and the positions that some organisations have in relation to that. And it was unauthored, unattributed. I don't know who wrote it, who authorised it, but it was done on government letterhead. Now, this is a private member's bill. It's got nothing to do with the government or the minister's own department. I know the minister supported the bill, but what disturbed me about that document were the inaccuracies in it, the misleading information that it contained that was distributed to other members in this place. And I'll just give you an example of that, about conscientious objection. I think one of the arguments they tried to put up about conscientious exemption was, well, institutions don't have a conscience, so why should we give them the right to have a conscientious objection? Which is a lot of rubbish, because there's a section in this bill that actually allows for conscientious exemptions for health practitioners. But what about the institutions they work for? Why shouldn't they be allowed to also express their beliefs? Well, the argument that was put in this paper and the reference to this argument is a person in the United Kingdom who has been a long time campaigner for euthanasia. But that wasn't in the paper, the fact that this person had a severe conflict of interest. So only one side of the story was put there. Now, I just want to point this out to you. There is case law, both here in Australia and in Europe, that recognises conscientious objection by institutions, other agencies, associations, unincorporated associations and societies. And I'll read you this line that was in a judgment in the Victorian Court. It was CYC versus Cobor, and Justice Reynolds said this: corporations have a long history of association with religious activity. Blackstone, in his commentaries on the law of England, lists advancement of religion first in the list of purposes that corporations might pursue. Religious institutions have long been organised as corporations at common law and under the King's Charter. It has been repeatedly held by European courts applying Article 9 of the European Convention of Human Rights that entities and associations, including corporations, unincorporated associations, institutions and societies, are capable of possessing and exercising the right to freedom of religious beliefs and principles. And there it is, it's there. It's right there in law. And it's quite remiss of a health minister not to try and balance that out. And there are other things in that paper that were quite disturbing, where he's reporting that various organisations had positions on BAD supporting it, like the pharmacists. Well, there is no position. You go to their website, their association isn't supportive of it. The AMA don't support it either, quite clearly. So there's another statement in that document that was totally erroneous. The Australian Midwifery and Nurses Federation, they're also mentioned in the document. Well, they don't have a position on BAD. In fact, they also acknowledge the fact that there could be conscientious objection. But no, the Health Minister or whoever wrote that article or that paper failed to put that in there. So that report, as I saw it, was designed to dissuade members in the House of Assembly who may be sitting on the fence, like I was at the beginning, and particularly about the conscientious objection amendment. Now, I'm glad that one of my colleagues in the House of Assembly, Steve Murray, has moved a similar amendment to the one I tried to move in the Legislative Council. And he's got a couple of other amendments as well in there. But he's moved this amendment to conscientious objection. And I sincerely hope that members in the House of Assembly, when they are considering, because it is a difficult decision to make, for anybody to make, but when they are considering their position, personally I truly hope that they've done the research, not being swayed by these unscientific polls that show massive support for BAD, but they've done their own homework, and that they've also looked at both sides of it, and they also consider conscientious objection, because it's a fundamental right for people to have a conscientious objection in our democratic society, and they should respect that. And they shouldn't have institutions being forced to do this. So, in closing, thank you for coming here today. It's a difficult bill, difficult for those members. I ask that you all respect the opinions of both those that support BAD and those that don't. It's no point trying to abuse them or do anything like that. That's not on. It's a difficult choice. Thank you very much. I'm not a minister, so anyway, you promoted me. But I'm happy to do it. Well, the thing is here, this is a rally. Yeah. Right? Okay, but this is a rally that's been designed. Do you support it? Well, I don't know what you're talking about, but it's the greatest sport ever. Okay. I'm used to that. having hecklers. But thank you very much for coming here today. As I said, please show respect to both sides.
Thank you very much, Frank. And thank you for the gentleman who has some passionate views. Frank mentioned conscientious objection for institutions. It might be instructive to think about which institutions might be affected. It might be Calvary Hospital. It might be the Wakefield Hospital, which is run by Calvary.
There's the truth in here,
It might be the Mary Potter Hospital. Or it might be St. Basil's Nursing Home, which is run by the Brisbane Orthodox Church.
Go to the Brisbane courtroom 2008 decision. The clearance diver carried his body to a fishing boat reported it. It's the same nonsense. You go to these dictionaries online, I've articulated 3 of them now. That's proof of claim, yeah? There's my fingerprint on there.
It's a lot closer to home than that.
And I like this attorney.
Okay.
This is ridiculous.
I'm extremely pleased that Bishop Siloam of the Greek Orthodox
Keep your thumb down to circumnavigation of our rights, yeah?
His Grace is very
I
committed
came over from
to
Victoria for
pro-life,
this, yeah? To make sure that the people are aware that this is a lie, yeah?
abortion and
It's called gross negligence, and there's a federal judge in Alaska who will back me into court, yeah? Let's take it to court. Let's see how
I'm
they
reminded that when Moses went to see God face to face, his face was radiant when he returned. And I see that Bishop Siloam always radiates Jesus wherever he goes. So could you please welcome Bishop Siloam?
Ladies and gentlemen, beloved friends, fellow humans, children of God. Today, of course, we're here to talk about euthanasia. But let's remind ourselves that this week is actually the National Care Week for Australia, and it's very inspiring to know. It is true that South Australia's lower house will start debating today voluntary assisted dying. This follows the passing of assisted suicide laws in Tasmania, Western Australia and Victoria, and Queensland is certainly going through the process of passing this as well. Euthanasia is indeed a dark agenda spreading throughout our nation. We're on the way, truly, as a nation, to collectively killing the weak, the sick, the depressed, the elderly. And as we heard Frank Tangelo say, honourable member, some countries in Europe have recently euthanized disabled children. Yet for the most part, there is little resistance to these laws. In South Australia, this is the 17th attempt in over 25 years of trying to pass the abominable law. In the other house, the voluntary assisted dying bill was passed on the 5th of May of this year. During the debate, politicians were chastised for calling it suicide, yet that is what it is. The World Medical Association prefers to call it physician-assisted suicide, and so do we. The Tasmanian government expects about 10 people to make use of this service in the next 12 months. $2.4 million of its health budget towards it. Surely this money could be better spent on helping people that are sick and dying live better rather than killing those who are soon about to die. The actual proposal for legalizing assisted suicide would indeed cover subjective existential suffering, including being a fear or a burden to others. It would pose a very real threat to the disabled, the elderly, those with mental health issues, and those Australians, including young people, struggling with suicidal ideation. Sadly, Australians every day die from suicide. Assisted suicide legally enshrines the idea that some human lives are simply not worth living. That these so-called lives not worth living can be directly and intentionally ended with the aid and indeed the blessing of the state. Such a message puts vulnerable people at risk of coercion and elder abuse. Such a law denies the reality that we indeed as humans flourish precisely in and through our care for others, and of course desires for being cared by others. Human beings in society are at their best when they are indeed involved in relationships of mutual love, concern and consideration, sometimes as givers, and of course sometimes as receivers of such care. The law should indeed foster such interactions and not undermine them. Dear beloved, let's get with the facts. There is no case for legalizing assisted suicide, and indeed no case can be made on the basis that this is the only possible response to Australians facing unrelievable pain. Rather, Australians need universal access to what we can accept today, and that is gold standard palliative care, which can indeed alleviate pain. Legalizing assisted suicide is unnecessary, unsafe, and simply bad public policy. The bill needs to be ditched. Voluntary assisted dying undermines human freedom because the Lord seems to offer a misleading choice. This misleading choice is as follows: you either choose to die horribly or you can take your own life. Yet, high quality specialist palliative care means that death does not have to be horrible. High palliative care is not merely a third option, it is the only option because it is the best option. South Australians do not yet have universal access to such specialist palliative care. The problem should be addressed by providing everyone with access to this best practice end-of-life care. Consequently, we are here today because we urge members of Parliament to vote against voluntary assisted dying. What we oppose is the legislation of any direct action specifically intended to bring about the death of a person. This includes the provision of lethal substances for that purpose, or the administration of such lethal substances by any means for that purpose. We believe that better end-of-life care begins with better conversations about death and dying, and how we can die well in ways that don't undermine the foundational values of our society. Dear beloved, no one should ever be better off dead when they could be alive. The best answer to suffering and the suffering that we see is to address the circumstances using the best practice available. In other words, a healthcare system that genuinely takes care of South Australians from the cradle until the grave. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Mr. Grace. Thank you again for taking time to come and address us. And our final speaker tonight is Mrs. Poppy Vivian, who is standing tonight. I think Poppy would have been involved in the pro-life activity movement in South Australia for well over 30 years. Well over 30 years. Of Right to Life South Australia. She's now the president of Right to Life. She also has some interesting stories that reflect on this euthanasia debate. So please welcome Poppy Vivi.
Thank you for your patience. And thank you for being here. It's wonderful to see you. I just wanted to start by saying that life is just so precious and we shouldn't really be taking risks in losing that before our time. Believe it or not, we actually do have a little common ground with the people that do want voluntary assisted dying, and we both believe in compassion. They recently had a rally here with a big sign, compassion, but there's one problem with that. We can't make a law that makes people care. I wish we could, but we can't. We can make a law, however, that will allow the killing of people without care. And we should really, really be concerned about that. We care about people. We care about all sorts of people. We don't believe that there's a life that's not worth living. It doesn't matter who you are, what you've been through, how old you are, how young you are, how sick you are. That doesn't matter. Your life is precious. And the whole reason we have laws is to actually protect us, not to do us harm. We hear a lot about choice. Right to Life does not oppose choice. We believe in choice. But there are certain limits. And when it comes to a choice where someone takes their own life or takes someone else's life, we don't believe in choice. We believe in caring more. We know that something must seriously be wrong if someone has got to a stage where they want to take their life or whether they want to take someone else's life. It's very difficult to watch someone die. We know what it's like. And there's so many stories I could share with you, but I'm guessing we've probably gone way over time. But there's been lots of stories regarding euthanasia from overseas, stories of people that actually had nothing wrong with them, but were still given I suppose something that ended their life. There's lots of stories about people that didn't have a choice. I'd like to quote here what a noted British neurosurgeon, who's a champion of assisted suicide, famously said, and I'm going to read it out so I don't get it wrong. Even if a few grannies are bullied into committing suicide, isn't that a price worth paying so that all these other people can die with dignity? Well, I'd like to say to that man, no, it's not a price that's worth paying. And what is dignified about having the government assist you to take your own life? People don't need help to do that. They're doing it already. They're doing it far too often. And we need to be helping those people, but not helping them to end their lives. I wanted to just end by sharing a personal story, and that is the one of my dearly loved mother-in-law. My mother-in-law was diagnosed with emphysema when she was in her 50s. And if anyone knows anything about emphysema, it's something that doesn't get better, it just gets worse. Even though she was in her 50s, she was determined that she wanted to live till 70. She said, I don't care after 70. I don't know why she could care after 70, but she wanted to make 70. So anyhow, during The last 10 years of her life, we had lots of, times where we thought this is it. She was hospitalised occasionally. The worst time was when she was actually 68 years old. She went into hospital. She didn't eat for 3 weeks. She was obviously very weak. And she was put on morphine. Now, because of my medical background, I was a little bit nosy, and I looked at her chart to see what medication she'd been given for her emphysema, and it turned out that she hadn't been given any prednisolone, which is a very basic drug. And also, I was wondering, why hasn't she been put on a saline drip? I mean, she's not eaten for 3 weeks. When we asked the doctor, can you please put her on a drip and give her some prednisolone, we were met with great anger, saying she doesn't have quality of life. And I couldn't wait for my husband to fly in from overseas because it was his mum. And when he did, I drove him straight from the airport to the hospital. And he spoke to the doctor a little more firmly than me and just said, "Will you please put her on a saline drip and prednisolone?" The doctor reluctantly and angrily agreed, and that very day she was put on this, she all of a sudden said, "I'm hungry." She started eating and was out of hospital at home 3 days later. Not only that, but she lived at home with a little bit of care for the next 5 years. And I just want to show you a photo. This is my mother-in-law. She did pass away, but here she is holding my youngest daughter. This photo would not have been possible had it not been for the knowledge that I got from life to life about what actually happens when people are dying. This photo is very, very special to me. I know I might not have even had this daughter had it not been for Right to Life, because years ago I thought I would just limit my family size. But as I went around schools talking about how precious life is, I really started to believe it. And I didn't limit my family size, and this is my youngest daughter, who's 1 of 6. And they are the most incredible blessings in the whole world. And I'm just so glad that my mother-in-law got to see her. She got to see her for another 2 years as well, on top of that. So I just wanted to say, like, we're playing with real people's lives here. If we're going to make a law,
I think it'd be good if we all congregated.
Normal, average people, not give more power, as Tony was saying, to those that already have power. Unfortunately, these laws will only protect those that are going to be very highly paid to end lives. And I think we can do a lot better for people than ending lives. I think we need to love more, I think we need to care more, I think we need to be there for people more, and I think we need to stand up and talk to those that can't speak for themselves. Because all of us are dependent on someone somewhere along out in our lives. Thank you so much for listening. And I just pray that God will bless all of you so much. Thank you for being here. And thank you, Alan, so much for organizing this. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. Well, I think the message really from that Euthanasia is not necessary. With good palliative care, with love and attention from the family, euthanasia is not necessary. So we'd like to encourage you to have everybody in there know that message. Now, you can try and get in there now, but I suspect they won't let you, especially with COVID rules. You could ring them. You can ring them on your mobile if you want to now. The Parliament House number is 8237 9370. Anybody who wants to know can get that from me afterwards. Encourage your friends to contact their politicians. The messages that we're receiving from politicians is that they are not getting anywhere near the same amount of contact from the public as on the abortion issue. With abortion, the contacts they had opposing the bill far exceeded those who were supporting of the bill. The reverse, unfortunately, is the case with euthanasia. So we really all do need to contact our politicians. If you feel confident, you can try and organise a meeting with them. I suggest that you go in pairs at least, rather than individually. And you all need to be pretty well au fait with what the bill actually says. It's a very long bill. They've endeavoured to cover all of the objections that we might make. Of course, the main objection is that the whole thing is unnecessary. I think that's the message we should give you. I understand it will be debated in the House of Assembly tonight. Our expectation is that it will be deferred until Wednesday the 9th of October. Parliament does not sit on the 2nd of, sorry, I said October? June, 9th of June. But that could change tonight, that could change. The government may give it extra time, they've said that they will, even though it's a private member's bill introduced by the opposition, but the government of the day has said that they will give it extra time, go figure. We have, I think, 2 weeks. It sounds like it's a long time, but it's not. It means that we need to be very, very active. It's great to see you all here, but every one of you, I'm sure, has got friends and colleagues who think the same way, but didn't think it worth coming along today. Get them to contact their MP, okay? Now, I think it might be opportune time for us to perhaps gather in front of the sign there, and those of us with cameras may be able to take a photo for posterity. So, if you could please all join us in front there. And if you want to talk to me afterwards, I can give you the number for Parliament House. Thank you very much indeed for coming. We have booked the steps. We have booked the steps again for the 9th, 2 weeks' time. You will no doubt read in the media tomorrow about the very lovely candlelit vigil that the DAB people are having tonight at 5:30. Okay? And they've also booked for the 9th. So we may or may not have another audience on that occasion. But anyway, we do the best we can, and perhaps I could call upon His Grace again to close the meeting in prayer.
Let the pure light of the divine knowledge shine in our hearts, loving Master, and open up the eyes of our mind to understand the message of the gospel. Instilling in our souls so the fear of your blessed commandments, so that having handed down all desires of the flesh, we may pursue a spiritual way of life, thinking and doing all those things that are peaceful to you. You are the illumination of our souls and bodies, Christ our God, and through you we offer glory together to your eternal Father.